July 1944, Camp Hearne, Texas. Tenente Antonio Rossi, an Italian officer captured 3 months prior near Tunis, pressed against the barbed wire fence. He watched a young American boy, no older than 10, effortlessly catch a baseball. This casual athleticism, a shocking contrast to the propaganda posters in Rome that promised brutal Allied treatment, set the tone for Antonio's unexpected captivity. The 17-day Atlantic crossing on a Liberty ship, sharing cramped quarters with 60 other Italian officers, was far from the deprivation they anticipated. Instead, American sailors provided consistent rations of canned beef, white bread, and fruit cocktail, food Antonio hadn't regularly seen in the final crumbling months of the North African campaign. His fellow lieutenant, Giorgio Mancini, "You whispered about a sinister American plot to fatten them up." Antonio, however, focused on the strange, soft bread unlike anything from home and waited. 3 days by rail brought them to Texas, a landscape Antonio found astonishingly flat, devoid of mountains or ancient towns. Camp Hearne, a sprawling compound of tar-papered barracks and guard towers, rose from this emptiness, holding 10,000 Italian prisoners. Officers, like Antonio, were segregated, receiving beds with mattresses, a luxury after rocky Tunisian ground. Processing took 4 hours. An American sergeant, speaking fractured Italian, recorded Antonio's details, including his hometown of Brescia, unseen since 1941. His personal effects, excluding his sidearm and wedding ring, were returned with a receipt, a promise of their safe storage and eventual return, a stark contrast to his expectation of confiscation. The sergeant then directed Antonio to the mess hall. Inside, the 70-foot-long building was filled with the tantalizing aroma of roasting meat, fresh bread, and real coffee, not the chicory substitute prevalent in wartime Italy. American cooks served portions of pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, 2 slices of white bread, coffee and chocolate cake onto segmented trays. Antonio sat, staring at the quantity of food, more than he'd seen on a single plate in 2 years. Giorgio echoed his disbelief, wondering if this special treatment preceded interrogation. An older Italian captain at a nearby table confirmed, "This is standard, every meal, 3 times daily." Antonio ate mechanically, struggling to reconcile this abundance with the reality of starving Italy, where his wife's letters described severe rationing and bombed cities. America, meanwhile, fed its prisoners pot roast and cake. Assigned to Barrack 7 with 11 other officers, Antonio discovered electric lights, running water and flush toilets. He marveled at the porcelain fixture, the wooden seat and the pull chain, a luxury vastly superior to the sand-dug latrines of Tunisia, even surpassing many homes in rural Italy. That first night, the strains of American big band jazz drifted from beyond the fence, and lights from the nearby town of Hearne illuminated the darkness, a vivid contrast to Italy's blackout protocols. The cognitive dissonance was palpable. The next morning, Antonio discovered 3 dirt baseball diamonds between the camp and town. American boys, 8 to 15, all played the game Antonio had only glimpsed in newsreels. Their casual competence was unsettling. In Italy, calcio was a religion, played with makeshift balls, requiring desperate practice. Baseball, however, demanded specialized, seemingly expensive equipment: leather gloves, carefully crafted wooden bats, and pristine white balls. These children played with effortless grace, their movements as natural as breathing. Antonio watched a lanky boy pitch with shocking velocity, the batter connecting with a sharp crack, sending the ball soaring. 3 boys sprinted, the smallest making a clean catch while running at full speed, then arcing a 60-meter throw directly into another boy's glove. The entire 10-second sequence was fluid, precise. These were not specially trained athletes, but ordinary boys demonstrating skills that would take years to develop in Italian sports, yet they treated it casually. Giorgio joined him. "What are they doing?" "Baseball," Antonio replied. "The American game." It looks complicated. It is, but watch, even the smallest children play it perfectly. They observed for 20 minutes. Fathers watched with relaxed pride, offering occasional instruction. The boys played with focused enjoyment, understanding rules Antonio couldn't decipher. What disturbed Antonio wasn't the game itself, but what it represented. A world of commonplace, complex sporting equipment, abundant leisure, and athletic development driven by casual play rather than desperate passion. The leather gloves alone likely cost more than most Italian families could afford for shoes. "My son is 7, Giorgio quietly observed. In Naples, we're grateful for bread. These boys have equipment worth more than my monthly salary before the war." Antonio nodded, thinking of Brescia being bombed, of his wife and daughter sheltering in a cellar. He recalled propaganda depicting America as weakened by luxury. Yet he saw a nation so wealthy, so resource-rich, that its children played with an abundance exceeding most Italian adults' experience. A nation that could feed enemy prisoners pot roast and cake while supplying a global war. That evening, Major Williams, the camp commandant, addressed the officers, outlining camp rules, work opportunities, and postal privileges. "You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention," he stated. "Adequate food, shelter, medical care, letters home twice monthly, recreational activities. Those working on local farms will receive small wages. Wages for prisoners, the concept was astounding." Williams concluded, "We expect respectful behavior. In return, we will treat you with dignity. War propaganda creates false expectations. You are prisoners, but also human beings. We will treat you accordingly." After the briefing, Antonio returned to the fence. The baseball game was over. Boys loaded bats and gloves into bicycle wagons, planning tomorrow's game, a world apart from Antonio's reality. He wondered how he could ever explain this to his wife and daughter, that while Italy starved, American children played elaborate games with expensive equipment next to prison camps, serving pot roast to enemy officers. The juxtaposition was world-shattering. Giorgio approached with 2 cups of coffee from the mess hall. The captain from Trieste says some prisoners receive Red Cross packages, chocolate, cigarettes, soap. "I believe it," Antonio said. "This changes everything, doesn't it?" Giorgio mused. "Everything we were told about the enemy, everything we believed about Italy's strength compared to America's weakness." Antonio watched the empty baseball diamond. Tomorrow the boys would return, their casual mastery demonstrating an abundance that exposed Mussolini's lies about Italian superiority and American decadence. "Yes," Antonio finally said, "everything changes." He would write home next week, but what to say? How to explain that the true shock was not brutality, but the devastating realization that Italy fought an enemy whose children played more sophisticated games than Italian adults, were possessed such staggering resources that feeding prisoners generously was routine. How could he write that in defeat? He lived better than many civilians back home. Antonio finished his coffee, watching the lights of Hearne burn freely. Tomorrow, the boys with their leather gloves and wooden bats would return, demonstrating the casual competence of a nation that had already won the war. He would watch again, trying to grasp what it meant to come from a world where children struggled for bread, fighting an enemy whose children played organized sports with equipment worth more than most Italian families possessed. The recognition settled in his chest, cold and undeniable. Italy had never stood a chance. October mornings at Camp Hearne began with the camp store opening at 0800 hours. Antonio Rossi, a prisoner of war, stood third in line, were clutching 80 cents earned from cotton picking. Inside the wooden building, shelves were filled with goods he never expected to see in a prison. Hershey's chocolate bars, Lucky Strike cigarettes, Gillette razor blades, toothpaste, writing paper, and ink. Italian officers crowded the store, marveling at the abundance. Corporal Jensen, a farm boy from Oklahoma, handled transactions routinely, calling each man by name. Antonio bought chocolate and cigarettes, experiencing the novel sensation of consumer choice in captivity, a stark contrast to fascist Italy, where such items were black market goods or rationed. By 0900 hours most weekdays, Italian POWs were loaded into open trucks, driven by local farmers eager for harvest labor. Antonio was assigned to the Patterson farm, 12 miles south of Hearne, or to pick cotton with 24 other Italians under minimal guard. Mr. Patterson, a weathered man in his 60s, demonstrated cotton-picking technique once before leaving them with only his teenage son as oversight. Antonio was struck by the trust. The work was arduous, his back aching by noon from the unfamiliar motion of handling cotton bolls. Yet at midday, the Pattersons returned with cold lemonade, sandwiches, and sliced watermelon. They ate with the prisoners, asking about their homes, crops in Italy, and families. Mrs. Patterson, showing a photo of her Navy son, spoke of him with pride and worry, despite knowing Antonio had fought against Americans. Her lack of hatred and willingness to share her family's story deeply affected Antonio. The farm equipment further revealed America's abundance. Patterson drove a John Deere tractor, easily maintaining it with spare parts, lubricants from Hearne, and organized toolboxes. In Italy, such machinery was rare, limited to large estates, and difficult to repair. Antonio's Tuscan village lacked access to the technology a single American family farm possessed. The barn had a gasoline-powered well pump, electric lights, and a radio playing music from Houston. This wasn't just consumer goods, it was robust infrastructure and agricultural efficiency. Patterson mentioned his 400-acre farm, primarily family-worked, now supplemented by POWs. 400 acres seemed immense compared to the tiny plots most Italian peasants worked. At 1600 hours, mail call brought letters from home. Antonio's mother wrote from their village near Lucca, detailing German retreats, Allied bombings, and worsening food shortages as winter approached. Bread was rationed to 200 grams daily, meat was absent for months, and the olive harvest was threatened by labor shortages due to young men being dead, captured, or joining partisans. Her trembling handwriting, marked by age and hunger, asked about his food and treatment. Antonio, clutching the letter in his barracks bunk, was sickened by the cognitive dissonance. His mother starved, while the camp cafeteria would serve pot roast and mashed potatoes for supper. Her daily bread ration was 1/8 of a single meal at Camp Hearne. He had fought for Mussolini's glory, only to receive 3 meals a day, while his mother suffered in the ruined remnants of that dream. Evening recreation unveiled more cultural differences. A Methodist church group from Bryan donated books, magazines, and Italian-language materials to the camp library through the YMCA. American volunteers, mostly older women, distributed items with genuine warmth, organizing conversation hours for POWs to practice English. Antonio reluctantly joined, finding himself talking with Mrs. Henderson, an elementary school teacher. She spoke with exaggerated clarity, asking about Italian literature, Dante and Petrarch. Their intellectual exchange extended beyond pleasantries. Mrs. Henderson showed photos of her classroom and explained her teaching methods, asking about Italian schools. Antonio described fascist youth organizations, mandatory political education, and the emphasis on military discipline. She listened without judgment, pondering her son's fight against fascism. Twice weekly, the camp theatre showed Hollywood films. Antonio watched Going My Way with Bing Crosby, a sentimental story about a Catholic priest in New York. The glimpses of American urban life were mesmerizing. Churches full of common people, joking priests, young people choosing their own paths, and speaking casually to authority. These behaviors would be punished in fascist Italy's rigid hierarchy. During real changes, prisoners debated whether the film was propaganda or reality. Some insisted it was American lies. Others, including Antonio, recognized the fundamental difference. American propaganda didn't need to lie about abundance because abundance existed. The film's casual background details, streets full of cars, stocked stores, well-fed and clothed people, match their daily observations. Captain Romano, a career officer who still wore his fascist party pin, confronted Antonio after the film. In the barracks, Romano argued that American kindness was deception, masking barbarism, and that their material abundance signified decadent weakness. He cited Mussolini's speeches on Roman virtue versus Anglo-Saxon corruption. Antonio countered with direct observations: the Pattersons' hard work, the American soldiers' competence in North Africa and Sicily, and the industrial capacity producing endless supplies as signs of strength, not weakness. Romano's voice rose in desperation. If fascism's promises were false, if America embodied vitality where they saw decay, then what had they fought for? What had their friends died for? The question hung, unanswered and terrible. Sunday mornings brought Catholic Mass, led by Father Murphy, an Irish-American priest from St. Anthony's Church. Antonio attended out of habit, but found himself listening to homilies on reconciliation, common humanity, and God's love transcending political boundaries, messages that contradicted fascist teachings. After Mass, Father Murphy invited prisoners to discussion groups on Catholic social teaching. Antonio joined a dozen other Italians, all seeking frameworks to understand their confusion. They studied papal encyclicals, debated just war theory, and examined individual conscience versus state authority. Though Father Murphy never directly criticized fascism, the texts subtly undermined it: human dignity preceding national identity, moral law superseding political expedience, and truth existing independently of government. Antonio realized his religious and political education in Italy was curated to produce obedient subjects, not thinking persons. Baseball games continued, and by late October, some Italian prisoners participated. Guards organized a league mixing American soldiers and POWs, teaching rules with demonstrations. Antonio watched Lieutenant Conti, a former Milan accountant, nervously swing the bat, connect and run to first base as both Americans and Italians cheered. Conti grinned, and Antonio grasped something profound. His government taught life as a struggle for national glory, but this moment on a dusty Texas diamond suggested life could also be about play, cooperation, and joy without ideological purpose. The game continued, marked by enthusiastic incompetence from Italians and good-natured instruction from Americans. Participation mattered more than winning. November brought news of Allied advances in Italy, German retreats, and partisan uprisings. The war was ending, and prisoners urgently discussed their futures. Some planned immediate returns to chaotic families. Others, like Antonio, faced harder calculations. His village was in a combat zone, his military career over, and his fascist party membership a liability. Openly, some prisoners discussed requesting to remain in America, applying for immigration, and building new lives in a country that seemed to offer more opportunity. Guards mentioned the post-war need for agricultural workers and farmers' interest in hiring former POWs. The possibility was both fantastical and real. In late November, Antonio wrote to his mother, carefully describing his experiences without revealing his profound shift in understanding. He mentioned working on Patterson's farm, adequate food and humane treatment, avoiding detailed descriptions of abundance to prevent sounding boastful while she starved. He asked about the village's condition, surviving buildings, neighbors, and reconstruction prospects. Tentatively, he suggested opportunities might exist elsewhere, a family relocation for better advantages. He couldn't articulate his true thoughts: Italy's grim future, fascism's void, America's casual prosperity and chaotic freedom, and how baseball had taught him about a wholly new societal organization, December brought Christmas preparations, creating unbearable tension with his mother's latest letter. The camp recreation committee planned a feast, decorated the mess hall, and organized an Italian choir. Local churches donated socks, candy, and writing supplies with generosity. Patterson invited Antonio and 3 other Italians to his family's Christmas dinner, approved by the camp commander. Antonio sat at an American table, eating turkey, sweet potatoes, and pecan pie, exchanging broken conversations with Patterson's family, and receiving a hand-knit scarf from Mrs. Patterson. The warmth, hospitality, and acceptance of former enemies into a family celebration felt deeply cultural. Meanwhile, his mother wrote of Christmas Mass in their ruined village church, sharing communal food, less than Antonio's single American meal. Guilt threatened to overwhelm gratitude, both valid and contradictory emotions. The year concluded with Antonio by the Camp Hearne fence, watching American children play baseball in the fading December light. Their joyful voices echoed in the cold air. Our 9 months of captivity had utterly transformed his understanding. American propaganda about weakness was a lie. The reality was strength, abundance, and a social order, allowing individual flourishing within a collective structure. Children played simply for pleasure, equipment readily available, without ideological justification. Their casual assumption that such joys were normal life hinted at a society his homeland might never achieve. The war would soon end, and he faced impossible choices: return to a defeated Italy or reinvent himself in a country that offered hope. As darkness fell, the children's laughter resonated across the Texas prairie. Antonio wondered what America would do with its victory, what Italy would become in defeat, and if a former fascist officer could find redemption in a land where children played freely and prisoners ate better than their mothers. Antonio Rossi returned to a war-torn Genoa on October 18, 1945, disembarking from the SS Marine Phoenix as part of a convoy repatriating 3,400 Italian prisoners from American camps. The 11-day journey brought a complex mix of relief and dread. Antonio carried only a duffel bag containing his POW papers, American-issue clothing, and a baseball signed by guards at Camp Hearne, including Sergeant William Patterson, who had introduced him to the American pastime. The Italy he returned to was starkly different from the one he had left in 1942. Genoa's port lay in ruins from German demolitions and Allied bombing. The city swelled with refugees, and severe food rationing meant only 200 grams of bread per person daily, a sharp contrast to the 700 grams he received at Camp Hearne. His family's apartment building was damaged, and his mother, Maria, had survived by selling family silver. Tragically, his father, a merchant marine officer, had died in 1943 when his ship was torpedoed off Sicily, news Antonio received via the Red Cross while imprisoned in Texas. Antonio was profoundly struck by the difference between American abundance and Italian devastation. He tried to explain Camp Hearne's meat rations, Coca-Cola at the canteen, educational programs, and athletic facilities to his younger brother, Paolo. Paolo, who had spent the war's final year dodging German press gangs, listened skeptically. The idea of American prison camps having baseball diamonds, Italian literature libraries, and carpentry workshops seemed fantastical to Italians struggling for basic necessities. Antonio stopped sharing these stories after his mother suggested they might be insensitive given Genoa's wartime suffering. Antonio's hopes for a military career quickly faded. Italy's armed forces were under Allied supervision, and former officers faced scrutiny. Though Antonio's capture before the September 1943 armistice spared him accusations of collaboration, the new military offered few opportunities. He instead leveraged family connections to enter business, establishing a small importing firm by 1947, facilitating trade between Italian manufacturers and American buyers looking to capitalize on Italy's cheap labor during Reconstruction. His English, honed at Camp Hearne, became invaluable for corresponding with American companies. In 1949, he traveled to the United States as a free man, visiting clients in New York and Texas. During a Houston trip, he drove to Hearne, finding the former POW camp largely dismantled, barracks sold, guard towers demolished, and farmland reclaimed. Only concrete foundations remained. An elderly farmer recalled Italian POWs helping with his cotton harvest. Antonio walked the perimeter, identifying the former baseball diamond by measuring from remaining landmarks. The experience evoked complex emotions. Camp Hearne, despite being a place of captivity, had also offered refuge from his homeland's wartime destruction. In 1950, Antonio married Lucia, and their first child, Marco, was born in 1952. Antonio's business flourished with Marshall Plan aid. They moved to a rebuilt apartment in Genoa, and Antonio joined the Rotary Club, where his American ties and English skills proved assets. He became known for his positive view of American culture, a rarity among many Italians resentful of Allied bombing. He often discussed baseball, attempting to explain its significance to friends who struggled to grasp a sport without a spherical ball or goals. The decision for permanent immigration to the US came in 1961, driven by opportunity and Italian political instability, particularly the disturbing Tambroni affair of 1960. His business increasingly required his presence in America, and Marco showed interest in American universities. Through business connections, the family secured visas, sailing from Genoa to New York in March 1962 on the SS Cristoforo Colombo. They settled in White Plains, New York, where Antonio established a new office specializing in Italian marble and tile. His American-born son, David, arrived in 1964. Antonio ensured both sons appreciated their Italian heritage while wholeheartedly embracing American culture, sometimes to Marco's surprise. In 1965, Antonio took Marco and David to Yankee Stadium for their first baseball game. Marco, used to Italian football's intensity, found baseball slow. Antonio, however, saw it through the lens of Camp Hearne, where American children playing baseball had symbolized a civilization so secure it could dedicate energy to leisure, a significant contrast to his war-torn home. Antonio naturalized as a US citizen in 1968 while retaining Italian citizenship. He traveled to Genoa regularly for business and family. His importing business thrived in the 1970s as American demand for Italian goods expanded beyond food to furniture and fashion. He opened showrooms in New York, Houston, and Los Angeles, employing over 40 by 1980. Marco studied international business at Georgetown, and David pursued architecture at Rice University in Houston. David's time at Rice, 1982 to 1986, brought Antonio back to Texas often. During one visit, he returned to Hearne, discovering the Camp Hearne Memorial Museum, established in 1982 in the old train depot. The museum, founded by local historians, contained artifacts, photographs, and oral histories. Antonio spent an afternoon there, donating his signed baseball and camp photographs. He gave a recorded interview detailing his experiences and observations of American abundance, particularly through children playing baseball. Dr. Michael Waters, the museum director and a history professor at Texas A&M, included Antonio's testimony in his 1985 book, Lone Star Stalag, documenting Axis prisoners' perceptions of American society. Antonio retired from active management in 1990, but remained chairman until his death in 2003 at 84. His New York Times obituary highlighted his business success, but omitted his POW experience, deemed too complex for the limited space. However, his son David published an essay in Texas Monthly in 2004, sharing his father's wartime baseball observations and their profound impact on his understanding of American culture and opportunity. The experiences of Italian POWs like Antonio Rossi shaped post-war Italian-American relations. Approximately 51,000 Italian military personnel were held in American camps from 1943 to 1946. Their generally positive treatment, unlike conditions in Axis or even British camps, fostered goodwill, influencing Italy's decision for Western alignment. Former POWs, who became business leaders, like Antonio, maintained American connections, facilitating trade and cultural exchange during Italy's post-war economic boom. The stark contrast between Axis POW experiences in America and Allied POW treatment in Axis camps is historically significant. Italian prisoners at Camp Hearne enjoyed recreational activities and adequate rations, while Allied prisoners in Italian and German camps faced deprivation, forced labor, and high mortality. Of 600,000 Italian POWs held by Allied nations, fewer than 1,500 died. Conversely, few of 73,000 Americans held by Germany, over 1,100 died, and death rates for Americans held by Japan exceeded 40%. The Italian POW experience in America was exceptional, reflecting a nation untouched by war at home, with surplus industrial capacity. POW programs also left lasting cultural marks on American communities. In Texas, Italian and German prisoners provided 3.5 million man-days of agricultural labor, 1943 to 1945, alleviating labor shortages. Many Texas farmers formed positive relationships with these work crews, leading dozens of former prisoners to immigrate to Texas after the war. In 1988, Hearne placed a historical marker at the former campsite, acknowledging the prisoners' agricultural contributions and their first exposure to American values. Modern military training on POW treatment uses the World War II American experience with Axis prisoners as a case study in Geneva Convention compliance. U.S. Armed Forces SEER schools emphasize that humane treatment encourages surrender, provides intelligence, maintains moral legitimacy, and offers post-war diplomatic advantages. This contrast became powerful wartime propaganda, boosting Axis surrender rates. The September 1943 Italian armistice was partly due to Italian military awareness that surrender to Americans promised safety, unlike German brutality. Academic research since the 1980s has highlighted POW narratives as unique insights into cultural perception and international relations. The University of Texas at Austin holds the largest Camp Hearne collection, including over 200 oral histories. These reveal Italian prisoners' shock at American material abundance, confusion at American informality, and struggle to reconcile fascist teachings of American weakness with undeniable American strength. Baseball, mentioned in many accounts, symbolized these contradictions. A complex game played casually by children, requiring resources, occupying time Italian children spent working or finding food. The Camp Hearne Memorial Museum has expanded significantly since Antonio's 1980s visit, opening a dedicated building in 1996. It receives 5,000 annual visitors, including descendants of former prisoners. Reunion events in 1995 and 2005 brought together former prisoners, guards, and locals, generating media coverage. The museum's educational programs preserve this unique chapter of Texas and World War II history. Antonio Rossi's story. From POW, observing American children playing baseball, to successful businessmen, reveals profound truths about cultural perception, economic systems, and historical circumstances. His journey was shaped by America's wartime isolation from combat, industrial abundance, commitment to international law, and post-war opportunities. His fascination with baseball was more than trivial. It illuminated a deep cultural observation about prosperity, leisure, and social values. The game symbolized a civilization's luxury of allowing children to play, secure in the assumption of guaranteed necessities. For a man who witnessed his homeland's devastation, this casual American competence symbolized a social achievement as significant as any military victory. Antonio's lifelong observation, culminating in his American son experiencing the game, demonstrates how individual cultural shock in captivity can reshape lives and foster international understanding across generations.